What is Iran saying in response to the allegations by the United States?
Well, we have to remember that just recently Pompeo admitted that when he was the head of the CIA, he said, we lied, we cheated, and we stole. And we also know from the Wall Street Journal that the United States has created a special division, the CIA, which gathers intelligence in Iran and can carry out covert operations. So we have no respect whatsoever for anything that the Americans say when it comes to Iran. And we all recall Colin Powell's UN Security Council speech where he lied about weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein and his regime will stop at nothing until something stops him.
Powell argued Iraq is deceiving the weapons inspectors.
This was a typical American show, complete with stunts and special effects.
So when Nikki Haley had a missile behind her and said that these missiles fired by the Yemeni armed forces against Saudi Arabia, that these were Iranian. That's not evidence, that's propaganda.
In this warehouse is concrete evidence of illegal Iranian weapons proliferation gathered from direct military attacks on our partners in the region. Behind me is an example of one of these attacks. These are the recovered pieces of a missile fired by Houthi militants from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, into Saudi Arabia, into Saudi Arabia.
And we also now, as your report pointed out, we had one person said they were torpedoes, another said they were mines. Now the Japanese owner of the tanker says they were apparently drones.
The president of the shipping firm also said he haven't watched the video released by the U.S. military. And, you know, in that video, the U.S. military claims it captured Iran's Revolutionary Guard removing an unexploded mine from the side of the Japanese-owned tanker. However, the Japanese shipping firm made a milder comment and said that the tanker was damaged by flying objects and strictly denied the possibility of torpedo attacks, as reported in some media. Denied the possibility of torpedo attacks. Denied the possibility of torpedo attacks. Denied the possibility of torpedo attacks.
So I think that the real culprit is the side that benefits from instability in the Persian Gulf region and the Gulf of Oman. Those who want to have conflict are what our foreign minister calls the B team: Bolton, Bibi Netanyahu, Ben Zayed, and Ben Salman. They are advocating conflict. So obviously this sort of thing is in their interest, and that's where the suspicion lies in the eyes of Iranians.
So are you saying that Iran believes the United States is responsible for these attacks, and how would the U.S. benefit?
The CIA has established a special branch for Iran. They have the motive, people like Bolton. Netanyahu has the motive. Remember, right before the attacks last month off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, Bolton said that the Israelis gave him intelligence that the Iranians want to carry out an attack. So that was very convenient. Immediately after that, there was an attack off the coast of the United Arab Emirates against a number of ships. And then here, right when the Japanese Prime Minister is about to go to the leader's office, Ayatollah Khamenei, to have a meeting, two ships are attacked off the coast of Iran that are linked to Japan. So for Iran, all of this just increases suspicion and reminds us more, again, of 2003, Colin Powell, and also the anti-Iranian propaganda that Nikki Haley used to spout regularly in the United States.
How much does this escalate tensions in the region, which are already high between the United States and Iran?
The two powerhouses were also on opposing sides when the revolution reached Syria. But this time, Saudi Arabia backed the opposition and Iran allied with the regime. Syria's Bashar al-Assad was always an important ally for Iran. He's from a minority Shia sect and rules over a majority Sunni state. So Iran wants to keep the Syrian regime in power at all costs. Since 2011, it has been supporting the Syrian regime with weapons, ground troops and training. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, continues to back the rebels and military defectors. 7 years later, the proxy war has had devastating effects on civilians, with 6 million Syrians displaced, 5 million refugees and more than 500,000 killed. Saudi Arabia's attempt to curb Iran's influence in Syria has failed so far, as the regime still controls most of the country. Then there is Yemen, where the Saudi-led coalition is engaged in a bitter fight against Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, who are Shias. This has drawn the country towards the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Tens of thousands of people have been killed since the start of the conflict, and more than 22 million Yemenis are in need of humanitarian assistance. While Iran supplies the Houthi rebels with weapons, Saudi Arabia has intervened direct with military action. They have launched more than 18,000 airstrikes and an imposed blockade, stopping critical aid from getting into the north of the country. While the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia has adopted its most aggressive stance in Yemen, other countries have not been spared. In Iraq, Lebanon and Bahrain, the countries are playing a critical role by supporting governments and political players along sectarian lines.
Tensions are already escalated because the United States has been engaging in economic warfare against ordinary Iranians. Our foreign minister calls it economic terrorism. The United States is trying to make Iranians suffer, and that's really no different from military conflict.
Riots on the ground in Iran, paired with the Trump administration's threat to punish any country that buys even a drop of Iranian crude. That, of course, fanned the price flames. We are now above $72 a barrel. We have the National Security Advisor John Bolton in Russia meeting with President Putin today, who told Bolton that Russian-American relations are not in the best shape.
Well, there's no doubt they're in very bad shape, and I understand why President Trump thinks it's important for the two largest nuclear powers on the face of the earth to try and have some kind of decent working relationship. The place we've been in the last several years is very bad and very dangerous. On the other hand, I have no illusions that President Vladimir Putin is going to stop attacking and challenging American interests until he clearly sees, and there's a demonstration by an American president, that there's going to be a real price for him to pay for his nefarious activities.
Standing shoulder to shoulder with Russia brings Iran back onto the world stage in a show of force. For Russia, a powerful comeback in the geopolitical focal point of the Middle East is at stake. Stopping radical Sunni Islam is essential for Moscow. Predominantly Shiite Iran seemingly won't threaten Russia's interests in the former republics of the Caucasus. Moscow has everything to gain from a strong axis formed with Iran and Turkey. Their sights are certainly set on counterbalancing US influence in the region. Andrew Tabler is from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
This marks the first time that Russia has based out of Iran, and marks an escalation in terms of the fight in Syria, not necessarily militarily, but in terms of the Russian alignment with Iran in places like Syria. And we can see very clearly that the Russians are playing a very strong political cards in places like Syria, while the United States is at best playing defense.
With this backdrop, the tension between Moscow and Ankara could not have lasted. Reconciliation is therefore underway. Iran welcomed this tripartite axis despite its historical enmity for Ankara. Unprecedented alliances are emerging to ward off Western influence in the region.
Ever since then, the U.S. under Obama was violating the deal, and now under Trump, they have exited the deal, and they're putting pressure on countries, dictating terms to the country not to trade with Iran. They're even preventing Iran from importing medicine. And people have died as a result of shortages of certain types of medicine, some cancer patients and others. So this sort of warfare has already increased tensions, and the Iranians believe that this is a part of that broader campaign being carried out by the regime in Washington.
گله میکنن که چرا ملت ایران میگن مرگ بر آمریکا؟ اولا بنده این رو برای حضرات بزرگان آمریکایی روشن کنم. مرگ بر آمریکا یعنی مرگ بر ترامپ و جان بولتون و پومپئو. مرگ بر اینا یعنی مرگ بر سردمداران. ما به مردم آمریکا کاری نداریم. مرگ بر آمریکا یعنی مرگ بر شما چند تایی که اون گروهی که دارید اداره میکنید کشورتون رو. مراد اینه. حالا در این دوره اینان